This is Fantology.
You may have heard of us.
All right, what's up, members of the Loser Club? It's your Fantology brother team, Josh and Ben here, to bring you a kind of review slash discussion of Stephen King's epic It, and we are looking forward to getting into it. No puns intended. Yep. It's going to be hard to not make puns with this book title.
It certainly is. Josh had read this book a few years ago. I decided to read it based on an episode that we did a few weeks ago now. We reviewed Booktuber's top 10 lists, and the Mike's book review had this list as, I think, one of his all-time favorites. So if you didn't catch that episode, you can go back and look for that. But that's kind of what inspired me to read it recently. Before we get too much further into it, we'll pause for an ad break. So, Josh, what made you start reading this book when you did? Because you read it, before you even started Fantology, right? Or maybe soon after we did. I mean, it was a while ago.
I think it was soon after we started Fantology. I had read the Gunslinger series, the Dark Tower series, and so I kind of read that. That was my first real exposure to Stephen King. I was just looking for kind of different fantasy series at the time, so I got exposed to Dark Tower, and then after Dark Tower, I just wanted to read more Stephen King. I think it was the first book I read of Stephen King's outside of the Dark Tower, just because, it's kind of the most popular one in a lot of ways, I guess. I mean, it's hard to rank that. They're all super popular, but I think it probably has the most common, I don't know.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, what other book can you point to? Because it has the clown going for it, right? No other Stephen King book really has a character that anybody would recognize, right? You think Pet Sematary. I mean, what are you going to put on there, right?
Yeah, I guess I don't know how many people, first of all, know it's a book versus, they might just think he's another horror character. You think about some of and you might not even know it's a real horror character, not just a creepy clown design,
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah.
And was this the first book that popularized scary clowns? I don't know,
I'm sure the scary clown thing was what's that book? Something Wicked This Way Comes, I think, had a scary clown. I don't know if that was before or after it. I don't know.
Okay.
I mean, I don't know if it started the genre, but I think it's probably one of Stephen King's most popular franchises or properties, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. To just give a quick example, I was trick-or-treating last year, so October of 2022, and I walked past this house and it had their decoration was really cool. They had a clown peeking out of a gutter, right, that they had managed to put in there. I think I even sent it on Discord, and I hadn't read it, but I still knew to what to attribute that to, you know what I mean? So, I think, and granted, I am more into books than the average person, but I hadn't read the book. So, I would say it's, to your point of why you read it next, I think it's probably his most popular book. So,
yeah, I remember. I wonder too how many people even know it's a book. Stephen King has this happen to him too. I forgot, I was hearing the story somewhere of somebody talking about Shawshank Redemption and how it was their favorite movie, and then somebody was like, oh, that's one of my favorite books, and then they're like, oh, that's not, they thought that the person was crazy for thinking it was a book, you know what I mean? They only knew the movie,
but that's a pretty old movie though, right?
Yeah, true. Yeah, but it has had several movies too.
I want to watch the most recent one that came out about it.
There's the double feature ones.
Is it pretty good? I haven't watched it yet, but I watched the not the preview, but the trailer for it, and it looked pretty good. All the kids looked like they're very well casted and stuff. So it made me really want to watch it.
The casting is all really good. It's all really good. Good. I got only halfway. I watched the whole first one and then got halfway through the second one, and for whatever reason just got interrupted while watching it and never finished it. So I've only seen one and a half of the recent duology of movies. And then same thing kind of happened. My wife and I last October, we were we wanted to watch the whole there's a mini series back in the 90s and so we wanted to watch, and it's like a 4.5 or 5 hour, and it's just like on as a movie type thing. So we made it about like a third of the way through that. And just the other week, she didn't know you were reading it or we had this episode plan or anything. She was like, I really want to finish that like clown movie. It's bugging me that I don't know what happened. So I'm like, all right, well, we'll we'll have to finish it. So
Well,
anyway.
that's actually what I'm most curious to see when we watch it is how they end it, because I don't want to do spoilers yet because we haven't given the warning yet, but yeah, I want to see how they end it. So I think before we started this episode, we kind of talked, and we're not going to go through like plot by plot because it's a super long book. I think it must be over 1,000 pages, right? I listened to it. It was like 45 hours. So long book. It's been a few years for you. I listened to it, so I'm not going to be able to remember like plot point by plot point, but we'll just kind of talk through what we liked about it, what we thought could be improved, and stuff like that. Does that sound good to you?
Yeah. Before we get into that, I also wanted to bring up the meta conversation, continue the meta conversation about
Mhm.
how it's continued to influence pop culture, like especially with Stranger Things being such a hit.
Yeah,
And Stranger Things really is it's not a ripoff or anything, but it's for sure like very inspired
heavily
by
influenced. Yeah,
it and other Stephen King works,
yeah,
but
and
most specifically it, I think.
yeah, and that was actually, I think I mentioned this in the last episode we talked about, with the top 10 episode. So I'll, excuse me if you've heard that episode, but this was something that, like, before I read the book and before I actually watched Mike's book review, I kind of just thought of it as a horror book. Like, even though I know how well Stephen King does characters, it was still just like, I'm like, I don't really want to just listen to a horror book, right?
Especially when you
Um,
see it's a 45-hour horror book, you're like,
yeah, exactly. I'm
what?
like,
Yeah.
okay, scary clown's great. Like, I don't want to invest that much time into it. But the book is like 10% scary clowns, right? And it's like 90% a group of kids figuring out, like, coming of age, right? And it's just and you begin to love them so much, and you see how they respond to the biggest trials of their life, and not only as kids but as adults. And so I think that, I think you could give this book to a, and this will also need a section on, like, um
Who would
maybe who should
recommend
be
this book
reading this
to?
book. Yeah, but you could give this book to a 16, 17, 18-year-old, and they'll get something out of it completely different than what I got out of it, because you're seeing life through the, like, two different lenses, which, it's always crazy how well, like, authors can do that. I'm amazed at that ability, to really capture the essence of childhood and then capture the essence of adulthood when you are, like, revisiting your childhood life. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah. Stephen King just knows how to tap into just so many different emotions of people and what they, as adults, as kids. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, and not only like that, but you're also doing it for like six main characters, so it's just, holy cow, like, it's just unbelievably talented. Um, yeah, so just, if you didn't think that you would like reading just like a scary book, because this book does have some disturbing elements to it. I'm not trying to like act like it doesn't, but if you can get through disturbing elements, um you're going to really find like a treasure of character work and of a coming of age tale, similar to Stranger Things, I guess. That's a very good comparison, because Stranger Things also has some disturbing elements.
Yeah. The one thing too, which none of the, I mean, I've enjoyed all the adaptations, but I don't feel like they, especially the newer ones, they feel more kind of funny than like they really lean into the seriousness of some of the subject matter that the book addresses, especially like with their adult selves. And not that they like shy away from it, like they're obviously like R-rated and like pretty like heavy, but they also lean into the absurdity of it, which the book does too. But I feel like there's just a lot more time in the book that it can spend more time on the heavier subject matter.
Yeah, I don't know if it definitely paints absurd pictures, but the characters all respond to those situations in very, like, realistic ways.
Mhm.
So it makes it feel not as absurd, right?
Yeah, but when you see, but when you see it on the screen, you know, like a
Yeah,
clown
it's like how
making a
they're supposed to
goofy
make that.
face, it's like it's going to be absurd. You know what I mean? Like when you see a dancing clown, even if it is kind of creepy, especially if you're afraid of clowns, like there's still absurdity to it.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. Yeah, I can see that. But I think one of the main themes of the book, though, is that like the evil really came from the people, right? Like not the
Mhm.
clown. You know, like 90% of the evil that they're overcoming is coming from their families, their friends, their you know, bullies. And while the clown is the scary thing and the embodiment of that, and maybe even causing the people to
Positive.
act that way, it still like highlights the reality that like humans are responsible for perpetrating most of the like suffering in everybody's life. And I think that that's like a, and I think that that's what the book leans into, as opposed to like the absurd horror elements.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Which both the adaptations I've seen do a decent job at, but I
yeah,
still feel like there hasn't been one that's like really leaned into it as like a super grim dark thing. Mostly because, you know, they want to get the teenagers coming to go pay the money. They don't, it's, you know, to make it a
yeah,
blockbuster hit and not as much of like a thinking movie, like something like
yeah.
Shawshank Redemption is. Anyway. All right. Well,
So
let's talk
yeah,
about it a little
so
bit.
should we get into spoilers? But I want to ask,
Mhm.
like, I know you're going to be asking me some questions, but I want to ask you because, so I guess entering into spoiler territory. So if you are interested in reading the book but haven't, you know,
Yeah.
click away.
Well, yeah. Let's also maybe get for those that might be on the fence about
Oh
reading
yeah,
it. There are some like very like heavy subjects that are dealt with, including like sexual assault, abuse, like that happening to kids, suicide, like basically any trigger warning you can really think of, like is
yeah,
going to be present in the book. There is like one scene which we warned Ben about, which is very not even divisive, but just very kind of universally scorned. And so you might, if you're like sensitive to things, not even but you might want to look up what that scene is. I don't know if it's like it's kind of spoilery, but also I don't know
yeah. It's
if you're on the fence
spoilery.
about reading it, you might want to
Yeah.
look into what that scene is without us spoiling it for you right now. Um, so I don't know if I could in good conscience recommend this to like a kid that's under 18. Really, I don't think. I think
Well, yeah. And not only that, but it also has like racial undertones that are
oh
not
yeah,
even
that's true. Yeah,
undertones. They're just racial. Like,
it,
uh,
it was written in the 70s, right? But based in I think it was published in 1980 or 1981. We should probably fact check this. But but it took place in the 50s, right?
yeah. Yeah. We should fact check that.
Oh, it
One
was not
second.
it was published in 1986. Um and yeah, and I think it took place mainly in the 50s with like with the flashback time period in the 50s. And so like the N word is used in like a derogatory and like racist way, um pretty much, and other racial slurs and racial like heavy racial things are used, you know, like it's basically every trigger warning you can imagine.
Yeah. And we should say that it is clear in the book that Stephen King does not support that behavior. And he like goes out of his way to, um, like say that racism is part of the evils that he's like talking
Right.
about. So it's not like, I'm not like, like in his defense, he was writing in a like, I think in a way that probably wouldn't be written in today, but it was also written in a way that
Yeah.
like makes it clear that um he's not supportive of that behavior.
Yeah, for sure, but still it's still anyway,
Yeah.
just basically any trigger warning you can think of, probably, you know, I mean, you want to be careful reading the book,
Yeah, for
so
sure. Yeah, so there, yeah, that's good. Definitely, yeah, if you're a parent like thinking about giving this to your 10-year-old, just don't, you know. Um,
I wonder how many kids, because I think honestly the movies are pretty safe. Like, I mean, obviously they're R-rated, at least the newer ones are, but like they're not that crazy. Like they definitely don't go to the depth that the books do. So like I could see like a 16-year-old, like enjoying the movie, and their parents probably being fine with it, and then they like go pick up the book and read it, and like it's way more intense than the movies. So
Yeah,
anyway, I wonder how much that has happened.
that's fair.
All right, let's get into it.
So before we get too far into it, I wanted to ask you because um I am not like a like up to par with Stephen King lore. You mentioned Gunslinger. That is probably like the book that has the most like lore and kind of like crossover universe and like the Stephen King universe in it. This one had a bit, like it had a fair bit. It like you had like characters astral projecting type thing at one point, kind of like speaking to deities in the universe. Now again, I know hardly anything about Stephen King lore. I pretty much know that like there's like a nefarious force that does nefarious force things in Gunslinger, and that I'm assuming that's similar to what was happening in Derry. Do you want to do you know any more about this?
I used to. I don't really think I can talk a lot about it.
Okay.
Because it's been so long since I've really taken a deep dive into like this Stephen King multiverse. Um, but yeah, I think that there's like a series of an overarching like level of like evil in the universe, and Pennywise comes from, or like it comes from that.
Okay. Yeah, it's interesting because I knew know that it exists just enough for it to be annoying that I didn't, like I feel like the book, if there was no like multiverse, then you just accept the book as it is, and just with all the oddities of the turtle dying and coughing up galaxies, and the like alien force crash landing on the planet and causing all these, like, if it's a standalone book, then cool, you just, it is what it is. But like the moment that you introduce the multiverse, you're like, okay, but like now I want to know more, and it's annoying that it's not more clear. Like there is no like balance like you might find in like a Brandon Sanderson multiverse. You know what I mean? Where if you want to know more about the Conjure after you read Tress, you can just like go read Mistborn. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I mean, and that's kind of the point of the multiverse or Stephen King's universe. There really isn't like a right way to approach it, and it is kind of scattershot, and things are kind of retconned. It's definitely not as
Yeah.
like fully planned out as Brandon Sanderson's like Cosmere is, or even like Mark Lawrence's books are to some extent. It's definitely much more of a scattershot, like, oh, like here's some overriding ideas and like similar characters and themes that kind of have, make the rules of the universe, which is really cool, but it's,
Yeah. Okay.
it is what it is. Yeah.
It is what it is. Sounds good. I'll just kind of accept it. I was wondering if there was like a, 2-paragraph answer that you could give me, but I don't really
Just go
want
to
to
wikis.
read a lot.
Just go to wikis for that. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. I just like know I want to continue reading Stephen King books, but I read like one a year, so it's, I don't want to like spoil anything for like the Gunslinger or whatever, So
You won't spoil anything. Anything you read outside of the Gunslinger or outside of Dark Tower is just gonna like promote your experience reading Dark Tower. I don't think that Dark Tower will spoil any other book that at least
Okay.
I've come across.
That's
Really.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Well, so this marks I've read 2 from Dark Tower. I've read Pet Cemetery, 11/23/64, and now it. So this was my 5th Stephen King book. So it's funny because you clearly I don't like consider myself like a Stephen King aficionado, but like, I'm getting up there.
Making your way. Yep.
Yeah. Kind of speaks to how many books he has out there, that you can read 5
Oh,
books or
there's so
something and be
many.
like, I still don't know anything about him. So
Pretty much. Okay, so what what did you think of the kids in the book? Did you have any favorites? Did any get under your skin? What do you think? Just kind of jump in
okay.
there.
Yeah. So first of all, obviously Stephen King is amazing with characters, but I will say like some critiques, I felt like at times Bill and Ben were kind of interchangeable. Um, they both had a um, they both had a thing for Bev. They both were kind of protagonists in their own right. So I don't know. So I felt like they were kind of interchangeable to some extent. I also felt like Stan was somewhat underdeveloped. Like his whole thing was that he was a skeptic, right? Like, and having him commit suicide as an adult so early on without even getting like his perspective as an adult, really, it was just like a weird choice for me because I'm like, who is this person? Like I just read like 50 pages about his life and I mean, it's from his wife's perspective, right? So I don't know.
Yeah.
So Stan, and that also made me like not care as much about his kid character.
So for me, I was kind of the opposite. Is I kind of it made it more tragic because you see his kid character that starts out because he was the one that his mother was super protective of him, right?
No, that's
Oh
Eddie.
no, that wasn't.
Stan is like the skeptic. He was like the Jewish kid who um he like got attacked by the bird but couldn't really believe it. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. For me, I just remember like reading about the suicide and being really sad, but then it made it even more sad as the character got more and more built up, but you knew that that was always going to be his fate.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that made it kind of it introduced another aspect of feeling for the character and
Yeah.
being saddened by it as well.
It's
And
kind of like a Kingism on steroids, right? Like Stephen King's like nefarious for like, and he would only see
spoiling
the
things.
sunrise 2 more times or something, and you're like, oh great,
Yeah.
like yeah. And in this case, it was just like a little bit more in your face. So
Mhm.
I could get behind that,
Yeah.
but it was still like of all the characters, again, like Stan's skepticism just felt very like service level. Um, I don't know. I don't know. Like, especially when you're comparing him to somebody like Eddie, who is like trying so hard to like conquer his mom and her like um paranoia about him getting injured and his own hypochondria and like realizing that it could just be a placebo effect. And when you have like Bill conquering his stutter and conquering the death of his brother. Like you have all these, and you have Bev with being like assaulted by her father. Like you have all these characters, and then there's like Stan. You know what I mean? So that
Yeah.
was, yeah. You're asking for like things that kind of got under my skin. That was one of them. Um, yeah, and yeah. So I don't know. I think Richie was kind of in a similar vein for me of just kind of being like, okay, so he's the jokester of the group, you know what I mean? But like he doesn't
Mhm.
really bring that much more to the table. Um, and and then you have Stan who's freaking amazing, right? Like the librarian and the like one black kid in a town and introducing the whole race dynamic and like anyway, like when you're competing against that, when you're Stan or when you're Richie, almost it just is like I don't know.
Yeah. Fair enough. Um, and what did you think of the town? The town is almost, in my opinion, like another character of the
Yeah, I mean,
book.
you really get to know like all these, like you feel like you could walk around Derry, right? Like you feel like you know where the hill is, where the pharmacy is, where they played and where they built their fort at, like you feel like you know how the sewer system works or like how the canal system works. And yeah, and then you just have like this um like weird pervading evil influence that comes up around every 27 years, and everybody in the town just kind of accepts it. It's pretty cool. Again, like I don't know if I've ever read quite a book with quite the same premise, but I know that the premise is very like common, especially in this kind of like genre of horror. Um, so I I like that aspect of it. And I am sad that Derry is not a real town that I could go do a little walking tour of.
Yeah, it's pretty much based off of that town, but I don't know. It was an amazing setting, like it almost feels like a different world in some ways, and
Yeah.
they do so much to flesh out. Like I even remember there's that scene where they go back and look back all the way to the 1700s or 1600s or whatever, when the first settlements were there, and
Yeah.
how it talks about the um different famines and times when people were killed, and there were a bunch of murders or unexplained disappearances and stuff. And it just really, like, time is taken to really make it feel like this place has people that are resilient, but also like has evil, like just running rampant across it every few years.
Yeah. And especially when it's like so weird, because in other settings, like these people, like most of the time these people seem very decent, right? And very like it's like, oh, like everybody's just kind of trying their best, and then you take a step back and you're like, but they're just like turning a blind eye to like these terrible things that are happening right in front of them, right? Like when Henry's chasing Bev, like, and somebody just kind of folds their newspaper and goes inside, or like, just holy cow, like
Mm.
what is, and then Stan is like doing all this research, and he's like, no, Derry has like a murder rate that's like 5 times higher than like the next or whatever, and the town cop's like, oh, that's just Derry, like
Yeah, it's true.
it's just,
And it wasn't towards the beginning of the book where there was a gay character and he like gets, does he die? He gets left for
yeah,
dead
it
or
gets murdered.
killed
I think that
or
was kind of
murdered?
what
Yeah.
started the second, or the wave, the like um the current wave of,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So I mean, yeah, it's just pretty horrible in a lot of ways.
Yeah, and just to kind of riff off that, it's really cool how, I mean, first of all, it's like tragic that the gay character died like that, but it was very like cool to me that one of the way that King built out the evilness of Derry was through its homophobia, right? Of like people writing like anti-gay slurs like underneath a kissing bridge or what, like, and he used that to display how evil the town was. And I'm not I don't think I was even alive when I wasn't alive when the book was even published. Like I don't know um like people's attitudes towards LGBTQ people back then, but I think King was probably ahead of his time for when he was like using that as an example of being evil, you know what I mean? So that was, again, I think King gets a lot of hate, and rightfully so, in a lot of cases, for being pretty extreme with how he treats certain groups. But I want to point out the positives where I find them, and that was an like admirable way to handle that.
Nice. Yeah. And then what about like the plot? Was it too slow for you? I remember mostly I was pretty enthralled and couldn't really put it down, but I do remember sometimes feeling like, things were lagging a little bit. Like there's just a lot of setup for like another confrontation with Pennywise that didn't really matter all that much.
Yes.
But
So this
yeah.
is like one of the great mysteries to Stephen King for me, because when I'm reading one of his books, I am so engrossed and I can't wait to start like listening to it again or reading it again. And then I get to the end of it, I'm like, there was so much fluff in that. Like I look back, like same with 11/23/64. I didn't feel it as much with Pet Cemetery, but there's like, I would be like, if I were to go back and reread this, I would just like skip over so much of it. Um,
Yeah.
so
And
yeah,
and you think back to the plot, or you read a plot summary, and there's really not all that much that happens.
yeah,
There is, but it's mostly just characters thinking to themselves about things, or the narrator telling you about interesting things while
yeah.
while the plot kind of happens.
And yeah, again, it's so interesting because I don't know how he does it. Like it is a great mystery to me, of how he pulls this off time and time again, because and maybe that's just because that's how life is. You know what I mean? Like you live every day and nothing exciting happens, but the but it feels important when you're living it, you know what I mean? And so I think that that's similar to how his books feel, you know what I mean? Like, is there really like, is it super important that we're reading about um you know like Eddie picking up his inhaler at the pharmacist, you know, like, and the pharmacist having a discussion with him that his inhaler isn't really necessary? Like, that's not what I would consider like to be exciting normally, but like for some reason it is, like, and you really care about that situation, that moment that you're reading it.
Mhm.
And yeah, and that again, I think that's just how life is for a lot of us, you know what I mean? Like, these situations just feel extremely important in the moment.
Yeah. And you really do care about Eddie as a character. So having his, that's kind of having his whole world turned upside down when he gets told that too.
Yeah,
Even if
yeah,
it's not a
that's true. But the only
monumentous
reason you care
plot
about
thing.
him as a character is because you've read so many of those little moments about him. You know what I mean? So many of the little moments of his mom worrying about him, or of, like him having a bad reaction to something or whatever, you just, and so when you look back on it, all those little moments don't seem important, but while you're reading them, they do.
Hmm. Yeah, I agree with that. And Stephen, yeah, again, that's something really only Stephen King can do, that I've read at least. I'm sure there's other authors that can do it too, but Stephen King does a really good job of it.
Yeah, and you read like a book like Wheel of Time, right? And you could almost say the same thing about that. You know what I mean? Like, you have all these little side quests that people are going on that don't really add anything, but it's fun to go on that quest with them, you know? Um, and in some level, that's like what all fantasy is about, is just like spending time with these characters. But I think the difference is that like each one, like most of the time when you're reading those things, they're like, there's some goal that you're like going on with the character. Whereas like in a Stephen King book, the goal could literally just be to escape Henry Bowers from beating you up. You know what I mean? Like, that is the goal. And once that happens, you're like, okay, next chapter,
It's true. Nice. Okay, let's see. What other questions? Um, what about Pennywise? We kind of talked about him, but it as a villain, was it compelling? Were you trying to figure out more about him? Like, did you care about the backstory, or was it just an evil force? Like, what did you think of the danger and the?
So this is it's interesting because I would have liked to care about him more, but you know, fifth book of Stephen King, and I kind of know that his endings just aren't the strongest part of it. So I just kind of accepted that um there would probably be not that much to it, which I was actually, so going into that, like in that mindset, I was actually pleasantly surprised that there was like an actual creature that they were fighting. You know what I mean? At the end, like this kind of like spider like creature. Um, and maybe the spider was just taking the form that they could recognize as humans or whatever. But there was like a tangible thing that they were able to fight, which I did not expect, and I was pleasantly surprised by that.
Hmm.
So in terms of trying to figure it out, I kind of like didn't let myself, because I didn't want to be disappointed. So whenever Stan would kind of do his like deep dives, I'll be like, okay, that's interesting, Stan, but like, you're not gonna really like come to any conclusions, you know? Um, so yeah, I think that that's my answer to that question, is there wasn't a great mystery behind it, because it was clear that it was just like this nefarious force that they were trying to conquer somehow.
Fair enough. I thought that Henry Bowers was a really good antagonist as well, kind of a more
Yeah.
down to earth antagonist, where you knew, like, you were scared of what he would do to each of the characters, and then when he finally like snaps and kills his dad, like that was pretty crazy. And then just knowing that he's like now completely kind of lost his mind and is kind of a slave in some ways to Pennywise or it or whatever. It's like, it's pretty eerie, and I thought that did a really good job.
Yeah, Henry is definitely like the actual protagonist that can drive the plot forward, which um was necessary for the book. And it's interesting because you contrast like Henry with Patrick. I don't know, you might not remember Patrick, but he was like the actual psychopath that like um killed his younger brother. And it's weird that he was just kind of lumped in with Henry Bowers' gang, because what am I trying to say? If you're part of the Losers Club, you view Henry as if he's Patrick. But if you are Henry, you feel like Henry has strong emotions. Like he's not a psychopath, right? Like he is getting beat up by his dad and he's taking like it's like perpetuating the abuse. And he's like doing what he knows, right? Like that is how his dad has taught him to interact with the world. And so if you're Henry, then you're like, no, I'm just like, this is how you assert dominance in life, right? And then but then you have Patrick with like a foil to Henry where he just like doesn't care, right? Like he's the definition of a psychopath. But he just kind of wanders in halfway through the book and then wanders back out. You know what I mean? Like I don't think that he really adds anything to the book.
I
So I
vaguely
was kind of
remember him, but yeah.
yeah. Wait, you didn't really remember him?
Vaguely.
Oh, you
remember
vaguely.
him. Yeah.
Yeah. I don't know. Yeah. So that's kind of my analysis on the whole Patrick Henry and Losers Club analysis. Um what did you think about Henry? Like did you like him as a character, or like
Yeah, no, I thought it was a similar thing where he where you just really feel bad for it. Like you start off hating him and then you just end up feeling really bad for him, especially because he was just like manipulated and controlled by his father, snaps and kills his father, and then he's like manipulated and controlled by like it, and
it's interesting
sucks.
that he was blamed for like everything too, like
Yeah.
after he kills his dad. Like that was
It's just an easy scapegoat.
right. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think
And
that does definitely like reflection of society, right? Like when we find somebody or something, like one thing that we can really like, we know it did one thing, and so it must have been responsible for everything else as well. Like that I feel like is a interesting like social commentary that Stephen King was doing there too.
yeah. And I do think that I did kind of appreciate that Stephen King, he didn't really try and redeem Henry, and that's where something maybe other authors, in order to try and make a more satisfying end, would like have Henry come along and actually save everyone. But no, he's just like,
he just ended up
it's just sad
after
yeah. And so it's sad, but it's that what makes it really compelling as well, that like, nope, we're not going to get any redemption for this character. He's just a goner.
Yeah. And I think that's again, it's like Stephen King's writing style, right? Where he just like writes the natural progression of a character, and when it's time for the character to die, then he died,
Mm-hmm. Speaking of, kind of go over, I guess, the ending now. What did you think? Was it satisfying? What did you think of it was Eddie that died, right?
Yeah, Eddie died.
Yeah.
I think he was the only one that died.
Outside of Stan committing suicide, right? Or wait,
yeah.
Eddie. Yeah.
Stan committed suicide. Eddie got his arm bitten off and then died.
Yeah.
Which
that was
sad. He like sprayed his inhaler down its throat and weakened him enough for them to kill it. Yeah. Super sad. And it was foreshadowed, you know what I mean? Like when he was leaving, he was kind of like, kind of knew that he wasn't going to come back.
And it was interesting because I was just reading the summary to it, and he gets his arm broken by Henry at the beginning or during the book, and then gets his arm bitten off by it, and that's what kills him. So it's got maybe some more foreshadowing as well.
Yeah. Well, I mean, there's a lot of things like George also gets his arm bitten off, right? So like there's a lot of a lot of stuff going on with arms in that book. But yeah, he gets his arm broken, and he So I like that. I liked I mean, I didn't like that. Obviously I didn't like that he died, but like I like that, like, somebody needed to die, you know what I mean? Otherwise it would have just been like they all got out like scot-free, you know?
Mhm.
Which I also don't think should have happened. Um so I appreciated that. I appreciated that he um like, I thought it was really cool how each of them used like how Richie would use his voices to conquer it, or Eddie ended up using his inhaler to conquer it. Like, all these things that were weaknesses were made into strengths, and I thought that that was like very well done. And you kind of see them throughout the book, like doing that, like accepting these weaknesses about themselves, and like, if not internalizing them, but like accepting them and using them and like as part of their, you know, their strengths. So that was cool.
Yeah. And in addition to kind of riffing off what you said there, like, I don't think I ever would have been surprised if Bill like would have sacrificed his life kind of at any point throughout the book in order to save someone or to finish it, or even to find out what happened to Georgie. But like with Eddie, like he was always afraid of death, and always afraid of, you know, that because of his kind of hypochondrianism or whatever from his mom, like, and so that was something that he needed to overcome. And anyway, yeah, so it's always sad when a character you love dies, but it I thought it was earned, and like you said, I think it some hard things needed to happen, and so yeah, I thought it was a good call as well.
Yeah. One thing and this might be, I'm gonna do my worst of the best right now. Do you have
Okay,
one
yeah,
ready or no?
sure. Yeah, let's do it. Yeah, we should probably wrap up anyway, so yeah, let's do it.
Okay.
Worst of the best.
Okay. So, worst of the best segment, roll the tape. Um, my worst of the best was the whole Tom and Bev plot line, because it was set up to be so great and then it just fizzled out at the end. Right. So I mean, to kind of recap, Tom is Bev's abusive husband, right? She kind of married her father, in a sense, and she became like this successful fashion designer while he just beat her up for smoking cigarettes. And he tracked her all the way down to Derry. And then when she's in Derry, he ends up kidnapping Bill's wife. And and then you're like, I was expecting him to be there when they were facing it or something, you know what I mean? Like, it's this like looming presence throughout the whole, like, throughout that whole part of the book, right? Like, he's on Bev's trail, like he beats up her friend in order to find out where she went, and he like flies there, and he like stays in the same hotel as them, and I'm like, dude, this is like, the suspense is killing me. And yeah, I guess he does kidnap Bill's wife, but like, that's it. You know, it just was such a good setup, and then it just dropped the ball. I'm like, Tom's got to do something intense here. You know, like he's got to maybe kill one of the characters, or you know, like something. And you know, like, I think all of us liked Bill's wife from what we knew of her, because she believed him and wanted to like follow him to Derry and do what's best for him. But like, eh, you know, like you need like, and you didn't even see when he kidnapped her. You just like faded to black during that part. So I don't know. Where's the best for me right there?
Yeah, so I was reading the summary, and so yeah, so it convinces him to kidnap Bill's wife and bring her to his lair, and then he just dies of shock after seeing it, right?
Yeah,
Yeah, I would, which I don't know. I mean, again, that's just Stephen King, right? Like, he's just gonna endings sometimes aren't satisfying for characters,
I
and
know, but it was just right there. Like, there just needed to be some type of way that it used it to, I don't know.
yeah,
Yeah. So that's my worst of the best there.
yeah, and Bill, yeah, and she ends up being okay, right? Yeah,
Bill's wife.
yeah, Bill's wife.
Yeah, that was a really cool part because you didn't know why with the silver bike, I forget what the cool
Hi
name
ho
of the bike.
silver.
Hi-ho, so yeah. Like you didn't know why the omnipotent or what's the when you're the overarching
Omniscient.
good presence was like kind of guiding them or whatever.
Yeah.
You didn't know why like they were led to the bike. And then that was the reason was to, like end up saving Bill's wife. He's like strapped around the back and um bomb down the hill, which is like kind of recapturing the childhood innocence and how that is really what is defeating it, even if it had, you know, made somebody catatonic, they could bring him back by bringing back childhood innocence. Like chef's kiss right there. The fact that that just kind of happened as like stapled on the back, it was like stapled on the back of the manuscript. It could have probably been better, but
Fair enough.
yeah.
Nice. Yeah, I don't know if I have a worst of the best. I think maybe it would be a good time to talk about that like weird like um orgy scene type thing with all the
Yeah, that's like
kids.
the worst of the worst.
Yeah, that's just the worst of the worst. Um I mean, so yeah, I don't really know what to say about it besides I feel like if we're doing a deep dive into we should probably bring it up. Like it
Yeah,
just
I
felt so
mean
unnecessary, you know?
it. Yeah, totally. I um like the one thing I'll say is that like it was foreshadowed. Like you can't like if you're editing that book, you're like, okay, it's not as simple as just taking out the scene. Like it was very intentional. Like it was
Yeah.
written into the book. I
But
don't know,
you
probably
yeah.
a dozen times.
Yeah, it's pretty easy to take it like in the adaptations. They just do like the Blood Brothers Pact and stuff. Like,
Right. I'm saying, but like, yeah,
yeah,
for sure. I get that. What I'm saying though is that like everybody's like, why wouldn't his editor stop him? Which, first of all, they should have. But like, you can kind of see it. It's like when you're an
yeah,
editor and you're reading the book, you're like, okay, I think that this scene needs to go, but like, it's going to be some work to kind of go back and pull out of the
yeah. I don't
foreshadowing.
know. I feel yeah, maybe, or I don't know. It was just weird. Yeah, worst of the worst. But anyway, just figure.
Yeah, I
throw
think
it out
I think
there.
somebody on Discord like said that he responded and like when an interviewer asked him about the scene, he was like, "Oh, I wasn't thinking about the sexual aspect of it." You're like, "Dude, you literally just had kids having sex in your book. How were you
Yeah,
not thinking about that?"
yeah, yeah.
So
Anyway, all right. Well, there we brought
we
that
probably
up.
just got demonetized,
Well,
but that's okay. If there's a book
yeah,
that we should get
the
demonetized
$3
for,
this video
it's
may have
good.
made from YouTube. No more. All right. Yeah. I think that's it. Anything else you want to bring up about it? I mean, I feel like in some ways, there's really no conversation that can do this book justice. Like it's so epic. And I'm sure some YouTuber has like a 4-hour breakdown of it and everything. But I don't know. I think it's a in some ways a really important book. In other ways, just with how it's influenced like culture, it's a great encapsulation of like Stephen King's books. I think if you read this book, then you have a really good idea for most of what Stephen King does with his books. So I think there's a lot going for it.
Yeah, I agree. Again, I'm gonna repeat myself and say it's a great coming of age tale. So consider that. But if you want like, I think I made this point on Discord too. If you want a similar book that it's not super similar, but like it accomplishes a lot of the same things. It's the 112364 book. Um, so it's basically like this without all the controversial aspects, I would say. Um, so you feel free to read that instead. You know
I,
what I
I
mean?
haven't read that. I should probably read it.
Yeah, you really should. It's not like a spoiler, but like basically this random dude is like sent back in time to try and
Yeah,
stop the assassination of JFK.
I know the kind of
Um,
premise of it, but yeah,
yeah. Well, I don't know, it's
that's
back.
basically all.
Yeah. So, but again, like you feel like this town, you feel like these characters, you feel like there's not as much of a buddy group dynamic, like a found family dynamic. There is to some extent, but my point being is that, like, I think on Discord I said this, like it was kind of like a mix between Pet Cemetery and 11/23/64, where you have like more of the horror elements of Pet Cemetery, but more of the like meandering character development of the 11/23. So, there you go. There's my recommendation. If you don't want to sit through it because of all the distasteful elements about it, then which I totally understand, and like you like I yeah,
Yeah.
then you should, then that's a great alternative.
Nice. All right. Well, thanks, Ben. Thanks for tuning in. If you stuck around this far, Ben's mentioned Discord a few times. Jump on Discord. You can find links below. And we have a pretty good group that talks about a pretty wide range of fantasy there. It's pretty healthy. You can feel free to come share your thoughts. Follow us on socials, like, comment, share. Yeah, give us 5-star rating if you do that. If you listen on a podcast app that allows that. I don't know. Yeah. Anything else you want to say?
Thanks, everyone.